My son was buried on a Tuesday in October, or so I believed. Every month, I drove 90 miles to hand his wife an envelope with $750 inside. I did it for 20 months without missing a single one. Then a woman I barely knew called me from a parking lot in Columbus and said, "Mr. Greer, I think you need to come down here right now. I just saw your son. I'm grateful you're here with me. Before I tell you what happened, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop a comment and let me know your city or state. It means more to me than you know." And one thing I want to be upfront about before we begin, some details in this story have been changed to protect identities and allow for narrative flow. But the heart of what I'm about to tell you is real. The grief is real. The betrayal was real. And what happened in that courthouse 4 months later was very, very real. Now let me take you back to where this all started. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 66 years old, and for 38 years I ran an auto repair shop out of a converted barn on the outskirts of Macon, Georgia. Not a franchise, not a chain, just my name on a hand-painted sign, 2 hydraulic lifts, and a reputation for being honest when most of the other guys weren't. I closed the shop 3 years ago when my knees finally told me they were done arguing about it. My wife Dorothy and I had planned to travel after that. She'd had a list on the refrigerator since 1997. Montana, Nova Scotia, that little fishing town in Oregon she'd seen on a cooking show. We never got to any of them. Our son Michael was 34 years old when they told me he was gone. Construction accident in Birmingham, Alabama, where he'd been working as a site foreman for a commercial build. A scaffolding collapse, they said. His wife Sandra called me on a Thursday morning. I remember I was changing the oil in Dorothy's Buick when my phone rang. I remember the sound Sandra made before she got any words out. Some sounds you don't forget. Michael left behind his wife and their daughter Lily, who was 6 years old at the time. She had Michael's brown eyes and the kind of laugh that could stop a bad day cold. Sandra had been working part-time at a dental office, but said the hours had been cut. The bills from the accident investigation were piling up. There was debt I hadn't known about. Insurance had paid out some of it, but not enough. Sandra was barely keeping the lights on. So I started driving to Birmingham every first Saturday of the month with $750 in an envelope. Michael was gone. Lily was still here. And Dorothy and I weren't going to let that little girl fall through the cracks. I want to be honest with you about what $750 meant to me at 65 years old. My Social Security didn't cover much more than my own rent and the prescriptions I took for blood pressure and the arthritis in both hands. The money I gave Sandra came from odd jobs, helping a buddy at his shop 2 Saturdays a month, selling equipment I'd held on to from the barn, things I'd planned to pass down to Michael someday. I sold those things and put the money in an envelope and drove 90 miles each way without complaining because that's what a father does. Dorothy went with me the first few times. She'd sit with Sandra in the kitchen and help Lily with a puzzle, or read her a book while I handed over the envelope. But as the months wore on, Dorothy stopped coming. She started sitting in her rocking chair more. Stopped cooking the big Sunday dinners she'd been making since before Michael was born. She told me she was tired. I told myself it was grief, that she'd come through it, that people do come through it. 8 months after Michael's funeral, I found Dorothy on the bathroom floor on a Wednesday morning. She was still in her housecoat. The television was on in the bedroom. I called 911, but I already knew. The paramedics confirmed what I think I'd been watching happen for months. Her heart had given out. The doctor said cardiac arrest. I knew better. Dorothy had loved that boy with everything she had. When he died, she gave the rest of herself over to grieving him, and there was nothing left to keep her going. After Dorothy passed, the drive to Birmingham felt different, heavier. I kept making it because stopping would have felt like giving up on the only piece of Michael that was still here, Lily. Every time I pulled into that driveway on Caldwell Street and she came running out the front door, I could breathe again for a few minutes. She called me Pop Pop. She saved drawings for me. The month she lost her first tooth, she called me before she called anyone else. But Sandra had changed in ways I told myself were just grief. She was cooler at the door, less willing to let me stay for dinner the way I used to. There was a man's jacket on the coat rack one Saturday that she said belonged to her brother. Her brother lived in Tennessee and, as far as I knew, hadn't visited once since Michael's funeral. I noticed the jacket. I noticed the half-empty coffee mug on the kitchen counter next to one of Sandra's mugs when Sandra didn't drink coffee. I noticed these things, and I told myself stories about them that made sense and didn't break my heart and kept me driving back every month with an envelope in the glove box. The Saturday that changed everything started the same way they all did. I left Macon at 7 in the morning, stopped for gas outside of Talladega, pulled onto Caldwell Street just before 10. Lily wasn't in the yard. The curtains in the living room were drawn, which was unusual for a sunny morning in June. I knocked. Sandra answered in a way I'd never seen before. The door opened about 4 inches. She looked past me before she looked at me, scanning the street like she was expecting someone else. "I've got this month's," I said, holding up the envelope. She took it without opening the door any wider. Her hair was done, perfume on. At 10 in the morning on a Saturday, standing in her doorway, "Is Lily home?" I asked. "She's sleeping in." Lily hadn't slept past 7:30 a day in her life. That child woke up like someone had plugged her in. "I just want to say hi," I said. "I've got her something." I held up a small wrapped package, a book she'd asked for the month before about horses. Sandra's eyes went to the package, then back to me. Her jaw tightened. "She's not feeling well, Walter. I'd rather not wake her. I'll tell her you came." She handed me nothing. No thank you. No invite inside. No stay for coffee. Just handed me back my own awkwardness and started closing the door. "Sandra," I said. She stopped. "Everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she said. "I appreciate you making the drive. I really do." And the door closed. I stood on that porch for a long moment. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking. I walked back to my truck and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. 19 months I'd been making this drive. 19 envelopes. $14,250, not counting the extra I'd slipped in for Lily's birthday and the Christmas I'd bought her a bicycle. All of it handed through a 4-inch gap in a door like I was a delivery man. I started the truck and drove home. 3 weeks later, I was at the hardware store on Manchester Expressway picking up caulking and a replacement shower head when my phone rang. The name on the screen was Bev Patterson. I almost didn't answer. Bev had been a neighbor of Michael and Sandra's when they lived in Columbus, before the move to Birmingham. We'd met at Lily's second birthday party and exchanged numbers the way people do when they're being polite. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. "Walter," she said before I could even say hello. Her voice was tight. "I'm standing in the parking lot of the Home Depot on Veterans Parkway, and I need you to listen to me very carefully." "All right," I said. "I just saw Michael." The floor of that hardware store didn't move, but I felt it move. I grabbed the shelving unit next to me. "That's not possible," I said. "Michael is gone. Walter, I've known that boy since Lily was in diapers. I watched him coach her t-ball. I've had Thanksgiving dinner at their table. I know Michael Greer's face." My mouth had gone dry. "What do you mean you saw him?" "He was in the garden center, with a woman, not Sandra, someone I didn't recognize, blonde, younger. They were looking at patio furniture. He was laughing, Walter. I almost called his name. And then I thought, that can't be right, because Michael is dead. So I stopped, and I just watched him for a minute, and I took a picture." She paused. "I'm sending it to you right now. Look at it and tell me I'm crazy. Tell me I'm wrong and I'll never bring it up again. But Walter, I don't think I'm wrong." My phone buzzed. I pulled it away from my ear and looked at the photo. It was taken from maybe 30 feet away, through a row of hanging flower baskets. The man in the picture had his back mostly to the camera, but he was turning to say something to the woman next to him, and his face was in partial profile. I had to sit down on a stack of patio pavers in the middle of that hardware store because my legs stopped working. I knew that jaw. I knew the way he stood with his weight on his left foot. I knew the way he ran a hand through the back of his hair when he was relaxed and happy. I had watched that exact gesture for 34 years. "Bev," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Don't approach him. Don't say anything. Can you get his license plate if he goes to his car?" She got it. I drove home in a state I can't fully describe to you. Not grief, not anger, not yet. Something older and colder than either of those. A question that had started somewhere in my chest and was spreading outward into my arms and fingers. The kind of question that, once it starts, doesn't stop until it has an answer. That night I called my sister-in-law Ruth, Dorothy's younger sister. She was 61, sharp as broken glass, and had spent 25 years as a claims investigator for a regional insurance company before she retired to Savannah. She was the most methodical person I'd ever known. She kept a spreadsheet of her grocery receipts. She once caught a contractor in a fraudulent home repair claim because she noticed the serial number on a replaced water heater didn't match the age he'd reported. I told her everything. The photo, Bev's call, the jacket on the coat rack, the coffee cups, Sandra's behavior at the door, the 20 months of payments. Ruth didn't say anything for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "I'll be in Macon by tomorrow morning. Don't call Sandra. Don't go back to Birmingham. Don't do anything." She arrived at 8 with a laptop, 2 legal pads, a box of printed records she'd already started pulling before she left Savannah, and enough focus to make me feel, for the first time in 3 weeks, like I wasn't going crazy. We started with the death certificate. Ruth had a contact at the Alabama Department of Public Health who owed her a professional courtesy. Within 2 hours, she had confirmed what some part of me had already started to suspect. The death certificate for Michael Allen Greer. Date of death, October 9th. Workplace accident, Jefferson County, Alabama. The certificate number did not correspond to any registered death in the state database for that period. I sat at my own kitchen table and stared at that information like it was written in a language I was still learning. "It's forged," Ruth said quietly. "The document format is close, but not exact. The coroner's seal is wrong for Jefferson County. The county updated their seal in 2022, and this one uses the old version. Whoever made this either didn't know that or didn't check." "The accident report?" I said. He showed me an OSHA incident report. Ruth was already typing. By noon, she had confirmed that the construction company listed on the report, Meridian Site Services, LLC, had dissolved 6 months before the reported accident date. The OSHA office in Birmingham had no record of an incident at the address listed. "All of it fake," Ruth said, and she said it without drama. The way someone says it when they've spent a career around fraud, and the shape of it no longer surprises them, only the people it leaves behind. "Michael might be alive," I said. Ruth looked at me over her reading glasses. "Based on what Bev saw and what we've confirmed, I think Michael is definitely alive. The question is where he's been and what the plan was." She turned the laptop to face me and pulled up a property records database. "Let's start with Sandra. She bought a house in Birmingham on Caldwell Street in 2021. Joint purchase with Michael. After the supposed death, ownership transferred to Sandra alone through a standard survivorship clause. She's kept up the mortgage, never missed a payment. Her listed income from the dental office is about $28,000 a year. Mortgage on that house is $980 a month. Car payment, utilities, food, Lily's school expenses. She can't cover all of that on $28,000. She's been getting my money," I said. "You're $750 a month," Ruth said, "but that still doesn't fully close the gap. Unless there's income you don't know about." She found it an hour later. A Venmo account linked to a phone number registered to a Karen Whitfield. The account had been sending regular transfers to Sandra's account for 20 months. $800 a month, like a subscription. "Who is Karen Whitfield?" I asked. Ruth typed for a while. Karen Whitfield, 31 years old, currently employed as a leasing agent in Hoover, Alabama, which is a suburb of Birmingham. "No priors, no flags." She paused. "She was tagged in a photo on Facebook with your son in 2019, at what looks like a company barbecue. Long before the accident." I looked at the photo. Ruth turned toward me. Michael standing next to a blonde woman, both of them squinting into the sun, laughing about something. I remembered that summer. I remembered Michael telling me he'd made a good friend at work, someone sharp, good at her job. He hadn't mentioned her name. He hadn't mentioned much of anything toward the end of that year, actually, and I'd told myself it was just the busyness of his life. Ruth spent the next 2 hours building a timeline. She pulled address records, vehicle registrations, financial traces. By mid-afternoon, the picture was complete enough to make me feel sick to my stomach. Michael had never been in a construction accident. He had never been in Birmingham on the day they told me he died. Records showed his truck, a black F-150 registered to his name, had received a parking citation in Hoover, Alabama, 3 days after his supposed death. The ticket had been paid. He'd been living with Karen Whitfield, Ruth said. The address history is clear. He moved into her apartment in Hoover in November of that year. He's been there, or between there and Sandra's house in Birmingham, this entire time. Sandra knew. She had to know. He's been funneling money through Karen's account to Sandra to help cover costs. And your payments have been pure supplemental income for the whole arrangement. 20 months, I said. $14,250. Ruth nodded. Plus Karen's contributions, plus Sandra's income. They've been running a three-way household on a comfortable budget while you drove 90 miles a month. I thought about Dorothy, about the way she'd shrunk into herself that last year, about the Sunday afternoons I'd come home from church and find her sitting in the rocking chair with Michael's baby photo album open in her lap, not looking at it, just holding it, about the last conversation I ever had with her, the week before she died, when she told me she dreamed about Michael sometimes and woke up and forgot for a few seconds that he was gone and that those seconds were the best part of her day. Ruth, I said. My voice was not steady. Dorothy died believing Michael was gone. I know. She grieved herself to death over a lie. Ruth's jaw tightened. She closed the laptop. She put her hand over mine on the table, and for a while neither of us said anything. Then she asked, "Do you want to know if there's more?" I looked at her. "There's an airline reservation I found through a contact." She hesitated. 3 one-way tickets, Atlanta to Cancun, departing July 19th. That's 11 days from now. 3, I said. Ruth was quiet. Michael, Sandra, and Karen. She nodded. I looked at her. 3 adults. 3 adults, she repeated. No child fare. No fourth seat. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window and looked at the backyard where Dorothy's rose bushes were growing out of control because I hadn't had the heart to touch them since she passed. She'd planted them the year Michael was born. 1 bush for every year they'd been married. 7 bushes. They're going to leave Lily behind, I said. It looks that way. She's 7 years old. Ruth stood up behind me. Walter, we have 11 days. Tell me how you want to handle this. I turned around. I want them to answer for every single thing they've done. All of it. Michael, Sandra. And I want Lily safe. Ruth nodded. Then we need to do this right. No confrontations, no phone calls. We take everything we have to law enforcement. She paused. I know a detective in Jefferson County, a woman named Iris Holloway. I worked with her twice on fraud cases when I was still at the company. She's thorough, and she doesn't like people who lie to collect money. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If you're still here, if you've been listening to this whole story, type "I'm still here" in the comments. That's all. Just let me know you haven't left. Because what comes next is the part of this story that I've had to put down and pick back up 100 times before I could tell it out loud. This is where everything broke open. And before we continue, I want to be clear. This story includes some elements shaped for storytelling purposes. But the core of what happened, the loss, the truth, and what it cost everyone involved, that part is not fiction. If you need to step away, I understand. But if you want to know what really happened, stay with me. Ruth contacted Detective Iris Holloway on a Monday morning. We met her at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office on a Tuesday afternoon and spread everything across a conference room table. The forged death certificate, the falsified OSHA report, the financial records, the Venmo transfers, the property records, the vehicle history, the parking citation dated 3 days after Michael was supposed to be dead, Bev Patterson's photograph from the Home Depot parking lot, and the airline reservations. Detective Holloway was 53, compact and quiet, with the kind of eyes that cataloged everything they landed on. She reviewed the documents for 40 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up at me. "How long have you been making payments?" she asked. 20 months, I said. $750 a month. And your wife? Passed away 8 months after the supposed accident. The doctors called it cardiac arrest. She grieved herself into the ground. Detective Holloway looked back at the paperwork. She tapped the airline reservation printout twice with one finger. July 19th. That's 9 days from now, Ruth said. Holloway looked at us. We're going to need a few days to verify this through our own channels. I want this to be airtight before we move. She paused. And the child? My granddaughter, Lily. She's 7. She's been living with Sandra in the Birmingham house. Ruth nodded toward the reservation printout. No ticket for her. Holloway's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. She picked up the printout. We'll move before the 19th. For the next 8 days, Ruth and I waited. It was the longest 8 days of my life, and I've had some long ones. I kept going over the same questions at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. Had Michael known, all those times I'd called Sandra to check on Lily, that I was really just 2 exits away from where he was living? Had he heard Lily say, "Pop Pop is on the phone"? Had he sat in Karen's apartment in Hoover, listening to his daughter ask about me through a wall, while I drove 90 miles with money in my glove box? Had he been there when Dorothy died? Had Sandra told him? Had he gone to the funeral? Or had he been somewhere else entirely, very much alive, eating dinner with someone else? I couldn't answer those questions in those 8 nights. I still can't answer all of them. On the morning of July 18th, the day before the flight, I sat in the back seat of Detective Holloway's unmarked car on a residential street 2 blocks from Sandra's house in Birmingham. Ruth was beside me. 2 marked patrol vehicles were parked out of sight around the corner. Holloway was in the front seat with her radio. At 7:14 inches the morning, a silver Honda Accord pulled to the curb in front of the house. The driver's door opened, and a woman got out. Blonde, mid-30s, moving quickly with the practiced efficiency of someone who has somewhere to be. Karen Whitfield. She walked to the front door without knocking and used a key. Ruth put her hand on my arm. At 7:29, the front door opened again, and 2 people came out carrying suitcases. Sandra first, rolling a large gray bag, looking at her phone, and then behind her, pausing in the doorway to lock the door with his left hand, while he held a duffel bag in his right, my son. He looked older. He'd grown a beard. He'd lost some weight, but he still stood with his weight on his left foot, and he still ran his right hand through the back of his hair before he reached for the keys. I didn't make a sound. I don't think I breathed. Holloway picked up her radio. All units, subjects, are loading the vehicle. We move in 4 minutes. Ruth squeezed my arm. I watched my son walk to the back of the Honda and lift his duffel into the trunk like he was going on vacation. Like it was any ordinary morning. Like he hadn't spent 20 months being dead to the 2 people on Earth who loved him most. "Go," Holloway said into the radio. Both patrol units rolled around opposite corners simultaneously. Holloway got out. Ruth and I followed. The officers approached the car from both sides. Sandra saw them first. She froze in the street with her suitcase handle in her hand, her phone dropping from her fingers onto the asphalt. Karen backed against the car, and Michael turned. He turned and he saw me standing 20 feet behind the officers, and his face did something complicated I don't have the right words for. Not guilt, exactly. Not shock. Something that was both of those things, and something older underneath them. "Michael Greer," an officer said, "you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and filing a false death certificate." He reached for Michael's arm. "What is this?" Michael said flatly. "What is this?" "You know what this is," Holloway said. They cuffed him. They cuffed Sandra. They cuffed Karen Whitfield, who had started crying before the handcuffs were even out. Officers entered the house to secure it and to check on Lily. And then I heard her, Lily's voice from inside, high and frightened. "Daddy?" I walked through that front door and into the living room. The suitcases were lined up by the back door. 3 of them. 3 adults. Lily's backpack was hanging on a hook by the staircase. Her sneakers were by the mat. Her juice cup was on the coffee table. She had been here all along. She was always going to still be here when they left. An officer had Lily in the hallway. She was in her pajamas, the ones with the little hedgehogs on them, her hair in a braid Sandra must have done the night before. When she saw me, she made a sound I'll never forget as long as I live, and ran across that living room. I caught her. I picked her up and held her against me, and she put both arms around my neck and held on with everything she had. She was shaking. "Pop, Pop," she said into my shoulder. "Pop, Pop, what's happening? Is Daddy in trouble?" I held her tighter. "It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." She pulled back and looked at me with her mother's dark eyes, which were also her grandmother's dark eyes, which were my son's eyes. "Pop, Pop, is Daddy coming back?" I brushed the hair off her face. "I'm going to make sure you're safe, Lily. That's the only thing that matters right now." Ruth appeared beside me. She didn't say anything. She just stood there. Outside, the officers were finishing up. I carried Lily to the front porch and sat on the step with her in my lap, my arm around her, while Detective Holloway read 3 people their rights on the sidewalk in front of a house I had been helping pay for. Sandra wouldn't look at me. Karen kept staring at the ground. Michael looked at Lily and something crossed his face that I still don't know how to name. Then Holloway stepped back, and an officer took Michael's arm to guide him to the patrol car. Michael stopped. He looked at me over the officer's shoulder. "Walter," he said. I looked back at him. He opened his mouth and closed it again. I stood up. I carried Lily inside so she wouldn't have to watch them put her father in the car. The arraignment was 2 weeks later. Ruth came with me. Lily stayed with a neighbor Ruth trusted. In a conference room outside the courtroom, with a deputy standing 3 feet away, Michael asked to speak with me. He looked like he hadn't slept. The beard was gone. He'd been in county for 2 weeks, and the weight he'd lost in the past 20 months looked even more pronounced under the fluorescent lights. I stood on the other side of the table and waited. "I didn't know about Mom," he said. His voice was rough. "I swear to you, Walter, Sandra was supposed to—" He stopped. "She was supposed to tell me if anything happened. Sandra knew I was making payments," I said. "She had your number. She had Karen's number. She had 20 months to find a way to get a message to you." He looked at the table. "Your mother spent 8 months convincing herself she had something to live for," I said, and my voice held steadier than I'd expected it to. "She sat in that rocking chair and talked to you. Not to your memory. To you. She thought you were somewhere she couldn't reach anymore, and she just kept talking to you, kept trying to be close to you, kept telling you things she wanted you to know. About Lily. About the garden. About everything. I watched her do it. I sat across the room and watched her, and I thought it was grief, taking its shape, and that she would come through it. She didn't come through it. She let go because she thought you were gone." Michael's jaw worked. "You were 42 minutes away," I said. "Dad, don't." I stared at him. At my son. At the boy who'd helped me pour a concrete driveway when he was 11 years old, and who'd cried at Dorothy's kitchen table when his first dog died, and who'd called me from the hospital the morning Lily was born and said, "Dad, she's the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life." I had loved this person for 34 years with everything I had. I had sold equipment I'd meant to leave him in order to put money in an envelope every month for his daughter. "I'm going to take care of Lily," I said. "That's not up for discussion. She is going to grow up knowing she is loved, and she is not going to carry what you put her down with any longer than she has to." His eyes were wet. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "I'm not there yet. Maybe someday. But I am telling you right now, in this room, that your daughter is not going to lose any more than she already has. She is going to be all right because I am going to make sure she is all right. And what you do with your time from here on out is between you and whatever you can live with." He didn't say anything. I left the room. 4 months later, I sat in a courtroom with Lily's hand in mine and Ruth on my other side. Michael received 7 years for fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying a legal document. The judge cited the emotional and financial harm to a surviving family member and the deliberate concealment maintained over nearly 2 years. He said nothing when the sentence was read. He looked at Lily once. She looked at her lap. Sandra received 5 years for conspiracy and fraud. She cried through most of the sentencing. Karen Whitfield received 4 years for her role in transferring fraudulent funds and aiding in the concealment. She was also ordered to pay restitution. Together, all 3 were ordered to repay $14,250 to me in full. The seized assets from Sandra's accounts and the liquidated value of the Birmingham house covered the majority of it. I was granted full legal custody of Lily. In the hallway, a deputy allowed a brief exchange. Sandra looked at me with an expression I can only describe as the face of someone who has finally stopped running and doesn't know what the stopping feels like. "Walter," she said, "I want you to know I never wanted Lily to be hurt." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "What you wanted doesn't change what happened. That little girl is going to grow up without both parents in her home because of choices you made. She's going to have questions I won't have good answers for. She's going to be angry someday, and she'll be right to be angry. What I hope is that by the time she's old enough to decide whether she wants to know you again, you've become someone worth knowing. That's the most honest thing I can tell you." The deputy moved Sandra along. I walked back to where Lily was sitting with Ruth, eating a peanut butter cracker Ruth had produced from her purse, with the kind of practical love that keeps families alive. "Ready to go home?" I asked Lily. She looked up at me. "Are you my home now, Pop Pop?" My throat closed. I reached down and took her hand. "Yeah, sweetheart, that's exactly what I am." The restitution check came 6 weeks later. I sat at the kitchen table where Ruth and I had spread out all those documents 3 months before, and I wrote down a list. Lily's college fund. I put in $10,000, locked until she turned 18. Whatever she wanted to do with her life, she would have a start that nobody could take away from her. A bedroom renovation. $3,000. She'd been sleeping in a room we'd set up quickly when she first came home. She deserved walls she'd picked herself, a bookshelf she'd filled herself, a desk big enough for the drawings she made every single day. Dorothy's garden. I put aside $1,200 to have it professionally restored and then maintained. Dorothy had loved that garden. The roses had gotten out of hand and some of the beds needed reworking. Lily had started coming out with me on weekend mornings to learn which was a weed and which wasn't, and she took the job seriously the way she took most things. The rest I put into savings, because Lily was 7 years old and life was going to keep coming, and I was 66 with 2 bad knees and a blood pressure prescription. And the most responsible thing I could do was be as prepared as possible to still be here for her. On a Saturday morning in September, Lily and I were in the backyard in the early cool of the morning, working along the far row's bed. She'd gotten good at the weeding. She had a focused way of doing things that reminded me so much of Dorothy that it made my chest ache in a way that was not quite sadness, but was not quite not sadness either. "Pop, Pop," she said, pulling a clump of crabgrass from around the base of the third bush. "Did Grandma Dorothy plant all of these?" "Every one of them," I said. She counted along the row. 1, 2, 3, she said, touching each bush lightly as she moved. 4, 5, 6, 7. She looked back at me. "Why 7? 1 for every year we'd been married when we planted them," I said. She thought about this. "So if you plant another one now, it would be for us?" I stopped working. I looked at her. She was crouched in the dirt in her old jeans with her work gloves on, looking up at me with the same straightforward eyes that had been looking at me across tables and backyards for 7 years. "Yeah," I said, "I think it would be exactly for us." She nodded like this was settled. "Then we should plant one." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in a long time, the kind that comes from somewhere underneath everything else. We went to the nursery that afternoon, and she picked a yellow climbing rose, Dorothy's favorite color. We planted it at the end of the row on a Saturday afternoon with garden dirt on both our knees. That evening, we sat on the back step while the light changed. The sky went orange and then a deep pink over the tree line. Lily leaned against my arm. "Pop, Pop," she said. "Do you think Grandma Dorothy knows about me? I mean, knows I'm here now?" "I think she always knew about you," I said. "From the day you were born." She was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "I think she'd be glad you have somebody to sit with." My throat tightened. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think so too." She looked up at the sky. "I'm glad I have somebody to sit with too." We stayed out there until the last light was gone. Looking back on all of it now, I understand the mistakes I made. I sent money without verifying where it went. I accepted a story because believing the story hurt less than questioning it. I drove 90 miles a month for 20 months and told myself it was love, when part of it was also the need to keep moving, to keep doing something, because stopping meant standing still in a grief that might swallow me the same way it swallowed Dorothy. Don't be like me in that part of it. If someone's story doesn't hold together, trust the place in you that notices. Ask the questions you're afraid to ask. The fear of the answer is almost never worse than the cost of not asking. But I also know that a stranger, a woman named Bev Patterson, who had no obligation to call me, saw something and picked up the phone anyway. And a pharmacist, and a neighbor, and a sister-in-law who drove from Savannah at 8 in the morning because she was asked to. People will show up for you if you let them. Don't try to carry the hard things alone. Lily is 8 years old now. She builds birdhouses with me on Saturdays. She tends the rose bed, and she knows every bush by name. She named them herself, which was not something I'd done, but she informed me firmly that they deserved names, and I had no grounds to argue. She reads a chapter book every week and tells me the whole plot over dinner with a level of detail that suggests she may have a future in law. She asked me once if she would get to see her dad again someday. I told her the truth. I told her that was something she would get to decide when she was older, that her feelings about it were allowed to be complicated, that loving someone and being hurt by them could exist at the same time, and neither one canceled the other out. She thought about it for a while. Then she said, "I think right now I'm mostly the second one." I told her that was completely fair. Every Sunday morning we go to the church Dorothy and I attended for 30 years, and we sit in the third pew from the front because that's where Dorothy always sat, and Lily sings the hymns louder than anyone in her row because she decided the first Sunday that loud was the right way to do it. I lost my wife. I lost my son in every way that mattered before I lost him to a courtroom. I lost 20 months and $14,000 and more sleep than I can count. But that girl in the third pew singing at the top of her lungs is still here, and everything I have left, I'm building around her. If this story stayed with you, please leave a comment below. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're new here, subscribe, because there are more stories on this channel about the things that cost us the most and what we find on the other side of them. Thank you for being here with me. You didn't have to stay. I'm glad you did.